Officer Derek Hammond had been working the evening shift in Riverside Hills for almost 4 years now. He knew every street, every corner, and he thought he knew exactly who belonged in this neighborhood and who didn't. The houses here were big, the lawns were perfect, and the cars in the driveways cost more than most people made in a year. It was just after 7 in the evening when Derek noticed the black Mercedes sedan driving slowly down Oak Street. The windows were tinted dark and the car seemed to be moving deliberately, like the driver was searching for something. Derek's eyes narrowed as he watched it from his patrol car parked near the corner. Something about it didn't sit right with him. The Mercedes slowed down even more and Derek could see the driver leaning forward, apparently reading the house numbers. That's when Derek decided to act. He flipped on his lights and pulled out behind the Mercedes, signaling for it to stop. The car pulled over smoothly, no hesitation, no attempt to speed away. It stopped right in front of a large colonial-style house with fresh landscaping. As Derek stepped out of his patrol car, he felt that familiar surge of authority. He'd made hundreds of stops like this, and his gut told him this one would be interesting. He approached the driver's side window, his hand instinctively resting near his belt, ready for anything. The window rolled down, and Derek found himself looking at a black man who appeared to be in his mid-40s. The man was wearing an expensive-looking suit, navy blue with a crisp white shirt. His hands were already on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, completely visible like he'd done this before. Many times before. "Good evening, officer," the man said calmly. His voice was steady, professional with no hint of nervousness or aggression. "License and registration," Derek said, skipping the pleasantries. He didn't explain why he'd pulled the car over. He didn't feel like he needed to. The man moved slowly and deliberately, reaching toward the glove compartment. "I'm reaching for my registration now," he announced clearly. He pulled out the documents, then carefully retrieved his wallet from his jacket pocket. He handed everything to Derek through the window. Derek took the documents and examined them under his flashlight. The name on the license read Raymond Foster. The address listed was right here in Riverside Hills, just 2 blocks away. The car registration matched the Mercedes. Everything appeared to be in order, but Derek wasn't satisfied. People could fake addresses. People could lease cars they couldn't afford just to look important. "What are you doing in this neighborhood, Mr. Foster?" Derek asked, his tone sharp and suspicious. Raymond's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm. "I live here, officer. I just purchased a home 2 weeks ago. I'm checking on some renovation work." "Uh-huh," Derek said, clearly unconvinced. "Which house?" Raymond gestured toward the colonial house they were parked in front of. "That one. Number 42. Derek looked at the house, then back at Raymond. The house had a sold sign in the front yard, but that didn't prove anything. "You're telling me you own that house?" "Yes, sir. Like I said, we just closed on it 2 weeks ago." Derek didn't like the way this was going. Something still felt off to him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what, or maybe he didn't want to admit what was really bothering him about this situation. "Step out of the vehicle, please," Derek ordered. Raymond's hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "May I ask why, officer?" "I've provided all my documentation." "I said step out of the vehicle." Derek's voice grew harder. "It's a safety check. Standard procedure." It wasn't standard procedure, and they both knew it. But Raymond also knew that arguing would only make things worse. He'd been through this enough times in his life to understand how these situations worked. Cooperate, stay calm, and get through it. That was the survival strategy. Raymond opened the door slowly and stepped out onto the sidewalk. He was tall, maybe 6'2", and his presence seemed to make Derek even more on edge. Derek immediately ordered him to turn around and place his hands on the car. "Is this really necessary?" Raymond asked quietly. "Just do it," Derek snapped. As Derek began patting him down, Raymond noticed lights turning on in the neighboring houses. Curtains were moving. People were watching. This was exactly what he'd hoped to avoid when he moved here. He'd wanted a fresh start, a peaceful neighborhood where he could just be another resident. Instead, here he was, being treated like a criminal on his own street. Derek's pat-down was thorough, almost aggressive. He checked every pocket, ran his hands down Raymond's arms and legs, making the whole thing last longer than it needed to. A woman walking her dog stopped on the opposite sidewalk, staring at the scene. "Nice car," Derek said as he finished the search. "Must have cost you quite a bit." "What do you do for work, Mr. Foster?" "I work for the city," Raymond replied simply. The city? Derek scoffed. Doing what? This car probably costs more than I make in a year. Raymond didn't answer. He just stood there, hands still on the car, waiting for this nightmare to end. Derek walked back to his patrol car and got on the radio. He called in the license plate number, asking for a full check on the vehicle. Raymond heard him request backup as well, for a broken taillight that didn't exist. For a man standing in front of his own house, the minutes ticked by slowly. More neighbors had come outside now, some standing on their porches, others gathering in small groups on the sidewalk. Raymond could feel their eyes on him, could imagine what they were thinking. He'd worked so hard to get here, to earn the right to live in a neighborhood like this, and now, on a quiet Tuesday evening, all of that was being stripped away by one officer's prejudice. Derek returned with a citation book in his hand, a satisfied look on his face. Whatever he was planning, Raymond knew it wasn't going to be good. Derek flipped open his citation book with the kind of confidence that came from years of never being questioned. He clicked his pen a few times, looking down at Raymond's license as if he was studying it carefully. But Raymond could tell this wasn't about the license anymore. This was about something else entirely. So Raymond, Derek said, dragging out the name like it left a bad taste in his mouth. You say you just bought that house? That's a pretty expensive piece of property. How exactly does someone afford a place like that working for the city? Raymond took a slow breath. Stay calm, he told himself. Don't give him a reason. I've worked hard for many years, officer. Saved my money. That's how? Right, Derek said, not even trying to hide his disbelief. And this Mercedes? You buy this with your city salary too? It's my car. It's paid for. Everything is legal and proper, Derek smirked. We'll see about that. That's when Raymond heard the sound of another police car approaching. The backup Derek had called for. A female officer stepped out, younger than Derek, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. She walked over with a professional stride, her eyes quickly taking in the scene. Raymond standing with his hands on his car, Derek hovering nearby with his citation book, and at least a dozen neighbors now watching from various points along the street. What do we have here? The female officer asked. Just doing a routine check, Derek said. Something felt off about this one. The female officer, whose name tag read K. Martinez, looked at Raymond, then at the house behind him, then back at Derek. Her expression was hard to read, but Raymond thought he saw a flicker of something. Doubt, maybe, or concern. Has he been cooperative? Officer Martinez asked. Very cooperative, Raymond answered before Derek could speak. I've provided all my documentation. Everything is in order. Martinez walked over and glanced at the documents still in Derek's hand. She studied them for a moment, then looked at the house again. The address on the license matches this location, she said quietly to Derek. Could be fake, Derek muttered. Could be a rental situation. I'm checking the VIN on the vehicle. Martinez nodded slowly, but Raymond could see the hesitation in her movements. She knew something wasn't right about this stop, but she also knew challenging a fellow officer on scene could cause problems for her later. By now, an older white couple had walked up from the house next door. The man was in his 70s, wearing a cardigan despite the warm evening. Excuse me, he called out. Is everything all right here? Derek turned toward them, his demeanor changing instantly. Everything's fine, sir. Just a routine traffic stop. Nothing to worry about. The old man looked at Raymond, then at the two officers. That's Raymond. He bought the Henderson place a couple weeks ago. Real nice fellow. Is there a problem? Derek's jaw tightened. Sir, I'm going to need you to step back and let us do our job. I'm just saying he lives here. My wife and I met him when he was looking at the house. He's our neighbor. Sir, please step back or I'll have to cite you for interfering with police business. The old man's wife tugged on his arm, pulling him away. But the damage was done. Now Derek looked foolish, and everyone watching knew it. That made him even more determined to find something wrong. Turn around, Derek ordered Raymond. Face me. Raymond complied, turning to face the officer. Under the streetlights, with all these people watching, he felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with physical safety. This was about dignity, about being made into a spectacle, reduced to a stereotype in front of people who were supposed to be his neighbors. You know, Derek continued, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. We get a lot of people trying to move into neighborhoods like this, people who want to pretend they're something they're not, people who lease expensive cars, borrow money for down payments just to keep up appearances. Raymond's hands clenched at his sides. Every word was designed to humiliate him, to plant doubt in the minds of everyone watching. Even if Derek didn't find anything illegal, the damage was already done. Tomorrow, these neighbors would wonder about him. They'd question whether he really belonged here. They'd watch his house a little more carefully, maybe report his guests as suspicious. "I have every right to be here," Raymond said, his voice still controlled but with an edge now. "I've broken no laws. I've given you no reason to treat me this way." "I'll decide what's reasonable and what's not," Derek shot back. "That's my job." Officer Martinez shifted uncomfortably. She pulled out her own radio and spoke quietly into it, running the VIN number Derek had requested. A few moments later, the response came back. The vehicle was registered to Raymond Foster. No lines, no warrants, no flags of any kind. She walked over to Derek and told him the results. Derek's face flushed red. He looked at the citation book in his hand, then at Raymond, then at all the neighbors still watching. "Your taillight is broken," Derek finally said, pointing at the back of the Mercedes. Raymond almost laughed. Almost. "No, it's not, officer. You can check it yourself. Both taillights are functioning perfectly. I saw it flickering when you were driving. Then turn on my car and check." "I'll give you permission right now." Derek hesitated. He knew the taillight wasn't broken. Everyone there knew it. But he'd gone too far now to back down completely. "I'm writing you a warning citation," he said, scribbling quickly. "Get it fixed." He tore the paper from his book and shoved it toward Raymond. "You're free to go, but I'll be watching this neighborhood. If I see anything suspicious, anything at all, I'll be back." Raymond took the citation without a word. He folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. Then he got back into his Mercedes, started the engine, and pulled into the driveway of his house. His house, the one he'd worked 20 years to afford. As he sat in his car watching Derek and Martinez drive away, watching the neighbors slowly disperse back to their homes, Raymond made a decision. This wasn't going to be the end of this story. Not by a long shot. Derek Hammond had no idea who he'd just humiliated, but he was about to find out. 3 days passed, and Derek Hammond felt pretty good about himself. He'd handled that situation in Riverside Hills exactly the way he always did. Sure, the guy had all the right paperwork, and yeah, maybe that neighbor vouching for him was inconvenient, but Derek had made his point. He'd shown who was in charge. On Thursday morning, Derek pulled into the parking lot at the police station like he always did, coffee in hand, ready for another shift. He nodded at a few officers heading out, swiped his badge at the door, and walked inside. That's when he saw the note taped to his locker. "Report to Internal Affairs. Room 304, 8 a.m. sharp." Derek's stomach dropped. Internal Affairs. Those 2 words made every cop nervous, no matter how clean they thought they were. He checked his watch. 7:55. He had 5 minutes. He'd never been to the Internal Affairs office before. Most officers went their entire careers without setting foot in that part of the building. It was up on the 3rd floor, away from the regular hustle of the station. The hallway was quiet, almost too quiet, with bland gray walls and fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. Derek found room 304 and knocked. A voice from inside told him to enter. The room was set up like a conference room with a long table and several chairs. 3 people were already sitting there. Derek recognized Captain Willis, the head of his precinct, looking stern and uncomfortable. Next to him was a woman from Human Resources whose name Derek couldn't remember. And at the head of the table sat a black man in a sharp gray suit, arranging papers in a folder. Derek's heart started pounding. Something about this felt wrong. "Officer Hammond," Captain Willis said. "Please sit down." Derek sat, his eyes moving from person to person, trying to read the room. Nobody was smiling. Nobody looked friendly. The man in the gray suit looked up from his papers, and that's when Derek's world started to crumble. It was him, the guy from the Mercedes, Raymond Foster. Sitting right there at the head of the table like he owned the place. "Officer Hammond," Raymond said, his voice calm and professional. "I don't believe we were properly introduced the other night. My name is Lieutenant Raymond Foster. I'm the new head of Internal Affairs for this district." The words hit Derek like a physical blow. "Lieutenant, Internal Affairs, head of the division." Derek opened his mouth, but no words came out. His mind was racing, trying to process what this meant, trying to figure out how bad this was going to be. "I transferred here from the state capital 3 weeks ago." Raymond continued. I spent 16 years there investigating officer misconduct, excessive force complaints, and civil rights violations. The commissioner brought me here specifically to clean up some issues this department has been having. Captain Willis shifted in his seat, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Raymond opened the folder in front of him. My first assignment was simple. Move into the district, live like a regular citizen, and observe how officers interact with the community. I bought a house in Riverside Hills because it's a good neighborhood with good schools. My daughter starts at Lincoln Middle School next month. Derek felt sick. He'd pulled over the head of internal affairs. He'd humiliated the one person in the entire department who had the power to end his career. I wasn't looking for trouble, Raymond said. I genuinely just wanted to see how things operated here. But on my first evening in my new neighborhood, you pulled me over. Raymond slid a piece of paper across the table. It was the warning citation Derek had written. You cited me for a broken taillight. Would you like to see the inspection report from the dealership? The car was serviced 2 days before that stop. Both taillights were functioning perfectly. They still are. Derek couldn't look at the paper. He stared at the table instead. Let's talk about that stop, Raymond said, pulling out another document. You pulled me over at 7:08 p.m. on Oak Street. You approached my vehicle and immediately demanded my license and registration without explaining why you'd stopped me. Can you tell me what your probable cause was? Derek's mouth was dry. I thought the taillight was out. From behind me. While I was driving, you could see a taillight malfunction clearly enough to justify a stop. But when we were parked and you were standing right next to the car, you wrote flickering on the citation? Silence, Raymond continued. You then asked me what I was doing in the neighborhood, despite the fact that my license clearly showed that address. You questioned how I could afford to live there. You made me exit the vehicle with no legal justification and conducted a pat-down search. You called for backup even though I was fully cooperative, and you made several comments that suggested you didn't believe I belonged in that neighborhood. Officer Martinez, Derek suddenly remembered. She'd been there. She'd heard everything. Officer Martinez filed a report the next morning, Raymond said as if reading Derek's thoughts. She stated that she was uncomfortable with how the stop was conducted. She noted that there appeared to be no valid reason for the extended detention. Raymond pulled out more papers. I also have statements from 4 neighbors who witnessed the incident. One of them tried to vouch for me and you threatened to cite him for interference. Captain Willis finally spoke up. Derek, this is serious. Very serious, but I was just... Derek started, then stopped. Just what? Just doing his job? Just following his instincts? Just making assumptions about who belonged in an expensive neighborhood and who didn't? Raymond leaned forward. I've been doing this job for a long time, Officer Hammond. I've seen good cops make mistakes. I've seen good cops have bad days. But I've also seen officers who operate with bias, who let their personal prejudices guide their decisions. That's what I saw the other night. Derek felt his career slipping away. Everything he'd worked for, gone because of one traffic stop. You're being placed on administrative leave effective immediately, Captain Willis said. Full investigation will be conducted. Turn in your badge and weapon before you leave today. Derek looked at Raymond, searching for some hint of mercy, some indication that this could be worked out. But Raymond's face was professional, detached. This wasn't personal for him. This was just another case of an officer who'd crossed the line. Do you have anything to say? Raymond asked. Derek thought about defending himself, about explaining his side. But what could he say? That he'd just been doing his job? That his instincts told him something was wrong? The truth was staring him in the face, and he couldn't hide from it anymore. No, sir, Derek finally whispered. Then we're done here, Raymond said, closing the folder. For now. Derek walked out of that conference room feeling like his legs might give out beneath him. He handed over his badge and gun at the front desk, and the clerk wouldn't even look him in the eye. Word traveled fast in a police station. By lunchtime, everyone would know that Derek Hammond was being investigated by internal affairs. The drive home was a blur. Derek's wife, Linda, was in the kitchen when he walked in at 9:30 in the morning. She looked up, surprised. You're home early. Are you sick? Derek sat down at the kitchen table and told her everything. The traffic stop, the confrontation, the meeting with internal affairs. When he finished, Linda was quiet for a long moment. Derek, she finally said, did you really say those things to him? About not belonging in the neighborhood? I was just trying to figure out what he was doing there. He lived there. His license said so. I didn't know that at the time. Linda shook her head slowly. Yes, you did. You saw his address. You just didn't believe it. Her words stung because they were true. Derek had seen the address. He'd just convinced himself it couldn't be real. Over the next 2 weeks, Raymond Foster conducted his investigation with the kind of thoroughness that made Derek's situation worse by the day. Raymond pulled Derek's activity reports going back 3 years. He reviewed every traffic stop, every citation, every interaction Derek had documented. A pattern emerged that Derek had never noticed himself. Or maybe he had noticed and just never cared. Out of 73 traffic stops Derek had made in Riverside Hills over the past year, 51 involved Black or Hispanic drivers. In a neighborhood where minorities made up less than 15% of the population, Raymond interviewed Officer Martinez in detail. She admitted that she'd felt uncomfortable during the stop but hadn't known what to do. She'd seen Derek operate this way before, she said, but he was a senior officer and she was still relatively new. Speaking up could have hurt her career. How many times have you witnessed Officer Hammond conduct stops like this? Raymond asked her. Martinez looked down at her hands. Maybe a dozen times. Maybe more. And you never reported it? I should have, she said quietly. I know I should have. But the culture here, it's hard to go against other officers. They close ranks. You become the problem instead of the solution. Raymond made notes. The culture issue was bigger than just Derek Hammond. It was something he'd need to address department-wide. Then Raymond found something else. A complaint filed 18 months earlier by a young man named Carlos Rivera. Carlos had been stopped by Derek in the same neighborhood, questioned about what he was doing there, detained for nearly 40 minutes. Carlos was a gardener who maintained several properties in Riverside Hills. He'd filed a formal complaint, but it had been dismissed by Derek's supervisor at the time as a misunderstanding. Raymond tracked down Carlos and interviewed him. The man's story was almost identical to Raymond's experience, except Carlos hadn't been as lucky. He'd gotten angry during the stop, raised his voice, and Derek had arrested him for disorderly conduct. Carlos spent a night in jail and had to hire a lawyer. The charges were eventually dropped, but the damage was done. Did anyone follow up with you after you filed your complaint? Raymond asked. Carlos laughed bitterly. Follow up? They told me I should be grateful I didn't get charged with resisting arrest. They said if I pushed the issue, they'd look into whether my work visa was legitimate. Raymond felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice professional. Your visa was legitimate, correct? Of course it was. I'm a citizen, born in Texas. But they assumed, just like that cop assumed I didn't belong in that neighborhood. Raymond added Carlos's testimony to his growing file. By the 3rd week, Raymond had interviewed 11 people who'd had problematic interactions with Derek Hammond. Not all of them had filed complaints. Some didn't know they could. Others were afraid of retaliation. One woman said she'd tried to report it but was told by the desk sergeant that Derek was just doing his job and she should be thankful the neighborhood was being kept safe. Raymond scheduled another meeting with Captain Willis. This time, the police commissioner was also present. Raymond laid out his findings in detail. The pattern of racial profiling, the ignored complaints, the institutional culture that protected officers like Derek instead of holding them accountable. This goes beyond one officer, Raymond said. Derek Hammond is a symptom of a bigger problem. But we have to start somewhere, and we start with him. The commissioner, a stern man in his 60s named Robert Chen, reviewed the documents carefully. What's your recommendation, Lieutenant Foster? Termination, Raymond said without hesitation. Officer Hammond violated department policy, civil rights laws, and the public trust. He's had multiple complaints that were never properly investigated. This isn't a case of poor judgment. It's a pattern of discriminatory behavior. Captain Willis looked uncomfortable. Derek's been with the department for 12 years. He's got commendations, solved cases. Termination seems extreme. Extreme. Raymond kept his voice level but firm. He falsified a traffic citation. He conducted an illegal search. He detained citizens without cause based solely on their race. And when someone tried to hold him accountable, the system protected him. That's what's extreme, Captain. The commissioner nodded slowly. I agree with Lieutenant Foster. We'll proceed with termination proceedings. Willis started to object, but the commissioner held up his hand. This ends now, Captain. We've been getting complaints about racial profiling for years. The city council is breathing down my neck. The community is losing trust, and we keep sweeping it under the rug. Lieutenant Foster was brought here to fix this mess, and I'm going to let him do his job. Derek received the notification of his termination hearing on a Friday afternoon. He had 1 week to prepare a defense if he wanted to fight it. He hired a lawyer, a guy who specialized in representing police officers. The lawyer reviewed the case and gave it to him straight. "You could fight this," the lawyer said, "but you're going to lose. They've got you cold on the false citation alone. Add in the pattern evidence, the witness statements, the complaints that were ignored. Derek, you're done. The best thing you can do is accept it and move on." Derek wanted to be angry. He wanted to blame Raymond Foster for destroying his career. But late at night, when he couldn't sleep, Derek kept replaying that traffic stop in his mind. He kept seeing Raymond's face, calm and controlled, even as Derek humiliated him in front of his new neighbors. What if Raymond had been someone else? What if he'd been just a regular guy with no power, no badge, no way to fight back? Derek had done this before to people who couldn't defend themselves. He'd gotten away with it every single time until now. The termination hearing lasted 3 hours. Derek sat at a table with his lawyer while Raymond presented the evidence methodically, piece by piece. The panel consisted of the commissioner, a representative from the city's legal department, and a union official. Derek had the right to speak in his own defense, but his lawyer advised against it. When it was over, the panel deliberated for less than 20 minutes. Derek Hammond was terminated from the police force, effective immediately. No pension, no benefits, no letter of recommendation. 12 years of service ended in a conference room on a Tuesday afternoon. Derek cleaned out his locker that same day. As he walked through the station with his box of personal items, some officers looked away. Others nodded at him sympathetically, like he was the victim in all this. A few younger officers, the ones who'd been watching how things were changing, didn't acknowledge him at all. In the parking lot, Derek passed Raymond, who was heading into the building. For a moment, they both stopped. Derek wanted to say something, wanted to defend himself or maybe apologize, but he couldn't find the words. Raymond looked at him, and Derek expected to see satisfaction or maybe anger. Instead, he saw something that looked almost like disappointment. "Officer Hammond," Raymond said quietly, "I want you to understand something. This wasn't personal. This was never about revenge. Then what was it about?" Derek asked, his voice bitter. "It was about all the people you pulled over who weren't the head of internal affairs. All the people who couldn't fight back. All the Carlos Riveras who spent nights in jail because you decided they didn't belong somewhere." Raymond paused. "You had power and you abused it. That's what this was about." Raymond walked past him into the station, leaving Derek standing alone in the parking lot. The next few months were the hardest of Derek's life. Finding a new job wasn't easy for a fired police officer. He applied at security companies, but they all asked the same question. "Why did you leave the force?" He tried being vague, but they always found out the truth. Terminated for racial profiling wasn't something you could hide. His marriage struggled. Linda stood by him at first, but the financial pressure and Derek's depression took their toll. They fought about money, about his job search, about everything. One night, after a particularly bad argument, Linda said something that cut deep. "You still don't get it, do you? You still think you're the victim here?" "I lost my career," Derek shot back. "I lost everything." "You lost your career because of your own choices," Linda said. "That man you pulled over? He was just driving home. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but you treated him like a criminal because of what he looked like. And you did it over and over again to people who had no way to defend themselves." Derek wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Deep down, he knew she was right. Meanwhile, Raymond Foster was transforming the police department. He implemented new protocols for traffic stops that required officers to document their probable cause before approaching a vehicle. He established a civilian review board that investigated complaints independently. He mandated bias training for every officer, and unlike the usual checkbox exercises, this training had teeth. Officers who showed patterns of discriminatory behavior faced real consequences. Some officers resented the changes. They complained that Raymond was making their jobs harder, that they couldn't do effective police work with all these new rules. But others, especially the younger officers like Martinez, embraced the reforms. They'd been uncomfortable with the old way of doing things but hadn't known how to speak up. 6 months after his termination, Derek was working at a warehouse, loading trucks for minimum wage. It was honest work, but it was a far cry from wearing a badge. One afternoon, during his lunch break, he saw a news story on his phone about the police department. They were being recognized by the state for their improved community relations. Raymond Foster was quoted in the article, talking about the importance of accountability and trust. Derek stared at the photo of Raymond in his uniform, decorated with commendations. The man had everything Derek had lost, and it was all because Derek had made assumptions based on skin color. One traffic stop had changed both their lives, just in very different directions. That weekend, Derek did something he'd been avoiding for months. He drove to Riverside Hills and parked across the street from number 42 Oak Street. Raymond's car was in the driveway. Derek could see through the front window where a young girl, maybe 12 years old, was doing homework at the dining room table. Raymond walked past the window, paused to say something to his daughter, and she laughed. It was just a normal family moment in a nice house in a good neighborhood. Exactly what Raymond had told Derek that night. He lived there. It was his home. Derek sat in his car for a long time watching that house. He thought about all the people he'd pulled over, all the times he'd questioned whether someone belonged somewhere. He thought about Carlos Rivera spending a night in jail. He thought about all the complaints that got swept under the rug because the system protected officers like him. He finally understood what Raymond had meant in the parking lot. This wasn't about one traffic stop. It was about every time Derek had let his biases guide his decisions. Every time he'd used his badge to make someone feel small. Every time the system had looked the other way, Derek started his car and drove away. He never went back to that neighborhood. 2 years later, Derek was working as a community liaison for a nonprofit that helped formerly incarcerated people reintegrate into society. The pay wasn't great, but the work felt meaningful in a way police work never had. He gave talks at schools and community centers about his experience, about how prejudice had cost him his career and hurt innocent people. It wasn't redemption exactly. Derek knew he couldn't undo the damage he'd caused, but he could use his story to maybe stop someone else from making the same mistakes. One evening, after giving a talk at a youth center, a young man approached him. "My uncle told me about you," the man said. "You're the cop who pulled over Lieutenant Foster." Derek nodded. "Yeah, that was me. My uncle said what you're doing now, talking about this stuff, it matters. He said not many people have the courage to admit when they were wrong." "Who's your uncle?" Derek asked. "Carlos Rivera. You arrested him a few years back." Derek felt his stomach drop. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry for what I did to him." The young man studied Derek's face for a moment, then nodded. "He knows. He told me to tell you that he forgives you. But he also said to make sure you keep doing this work. Keep telling your story, because maybe it'll help the next cop think twice before he does what you did." Derek watched the young man walk away, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt something close to peace. He couldn't change the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could help change the future. That's all any of us can do.